My name is Bridget, and I'm 41 years old. What I went through during what was supposed to be a calm family vacation on a Disney cruise in the summer of 2020 became the most terrifying discovery about child danger inside big institutions that I ever imagined. I was traveling with my 8-year-old son, Noah, who had been counting down the days to this trip, especially the kids club activities that Disney advertised as fun, safe, and educational for children his age. As a single mom working 2 jobs just to get by, this cruise was a huge financial stretch for me. But I wanted to give Noah something bright after the hard year we had since his father left for deployment. What I learned about the children's programs on that ship has stayed with me as nightmares and a deep fear of any group that claims to protect kids. The ship itself looked exactly like Disney promised. It was huge and sparkling, with pools, restaurants, shows, and special child-only areas divided by age groups. Noah got excited right away when he saw the kids club called the Oceaneer Club, with counselors who looked friendly and full of energy. During orientation, they talked about their learning programs, supervised activities, and safety rules in a way that made me feel okay trusting them with Noah. The place looked amazing, full of themed rooms, crafts, games, screens, and things to keep kids busy for hours while parents explored the rest of the ship. For the first 2 days, Noah went to the kids club happy and came back to our cabin with stories about games, crafts, and new friends. He looked cheerful, which made me relieved after months of watching him struggle emotionally because of his father's absence. The counselors, led by a woman named Phoenix, acted like they understood children and wanted to make the experience positive. I felt safe leaving Noah with them for a few hours each day so I could finally relax and attend adult events. But by the 3rd day, I saw small changes in Noah that only a mother would notice. He became quieter, less open about what he did in the kids club. When I asked him about his day, his stories didn't line up or made little sense. He acted tired and spaced out, even when doing things he normally loved. What scared me most was how unwilling he suddenly became about going back the next morning. That was nothing like the child who had been thrilled to join the program earlier. When I gently pushed Noah to tell me what was going on, he seemed nervous, almost afraid. He said there were special sessions for certain kids, activities Phoenix called advanced learning for children with special interests or abilities. These sessions happened in separate rooms far from the main club, and Noah said the kids were told not to talk about them with their parents or other children. The secrecy made my stomach drop. I always taught Noah that he could tell me anything, but suddenly he looked like a child carrying a heavy secret. When I asked Phoenix and her team about it, they acted perfectly polite, but avoided my questions. They said some programs were age-based or skill-based, and that it was normal to separate certain groups for better learning. When I requested to observe the sessions or get details about them, they insisted parents watching would disrupt the learning atmosphere and ruin the surprise parts of the activities. On the 4th day, I decided to watch things myself. I stayed near the kids club during the times Noah said these special sessions happened. Through windows and propped open doors, I saw enough to make my skin crawl. The children weren't doing crafts or games. They were being questioned, deep personal questions about their families, their fears, their worries, and how they felt about their parents. It looked more like psychological tests or behavior experiments. They seemed to be gathering very private information about the kids. What frightened me even more was that I saw things that looked like attempts to make inappropriate touch seem normal, and to teach kids to hide things from their parents. I saw staff touching children in strange, needless ways, watching closely how each child reacted. Kids who looked uncomfortable were taken aside and told to trust adults more, to follow directions, to understand that grown-ups knew what was best for them. Everything about the room felt wrong, slow, quiet, heavy, like it was built to pull children into something they didn't understand. When I confronted Phoenix, her attitude changed instantly. She became cold, defensive, almost threatening. She told me I was misunderstanding normal child development exercises, that my fears were coming from my own stress rather than anything actually inappropriate. She even suggested that because I was a single mother, maybe I was being too protective and suspicious of people who were trained professionals. When I said I wanted to speak to her supervisors or Disney management, she warned me that accusing staff without proof could lead to legal trouble for me and might stop me from traveling with Disney again. Over the next 2 days, I tried to get proof of what I saw. I tried to take photos, to record conversations, to catch moments that would show the truth, but the staff clearly knew I was watching. Their behavior shifted, and I could tell they were trying to hide things from me. Noah stayed in the regular activities, but I refused to let him attend anything private or special. Even then, he became more anxious. He started having nightmares about grown-ups asking him strange questions and touching him in ways that made him uncomfortable. He kept asking me if he had done something wrong, if I would still love him even if he had secrets he was not supposed to talk about. Hearing that from an 8-year-old broke something inside me. I went to Disney management and ship security again and again, but they brushed me off. They said the children's programs were checked often by child safety experts, and that all staff members passed background checks and training. They hinted that maybe I was misunderstanding things or being too cautious. When I demanded an official investigation, they said they needed proof of an actual crime, not just a parent's concerns about the way a program worked. The hardest part of all of this was learning how nearly impossible it is to challenge big child care institutions, especially on a cruise ship, where everything happens far from outside oversight, and where the company controls nearly every part of the environment. Disney's legal team made it clear that they would fight hard to protect their reputation from any claims that could hurt their brand, and that trying to file formal complaints could drag families into long, costly legal battles most parents could never afford. It was obvious they had dealt with worried parents before, and they had polished methods to scare people away from pushing investigations or talking publicly about what happened. When our cruise finally ended and we came back home, Noah needed long-term therapy to deal with whatever had been done to him during those quiet, hidden sessions in the kids' club. His therapist explained that he showed signs of being mentally manipulated and possibly groomed, but the proof was mostly emotional, not physical, and the people responsible were out of reach of local law enforcement because everything took place in international waters. When we tried to push criminal charges, we ran into problems with jurisdiction and with finding other families willing to speak, since many were too frightened or unsure to get involved. The investigation that came later uncovered a disturbing pattern of similar reports tied to Disney's children's programs across several ships and dates. But the cruise line's legal and PR teams were skilled at shrinking these stories, covering them up before news outlets or regulators could get involved. Families who tried to speak out were often shut down with legal threats or given quiet financial settlements that forced them to sign non-disclosure agreements. The protection of people who prey on children within cruise ship programs seems to be a widespread issue affecting several cruise lines, not just Disney. Today, more than 4 years after our terrifying cruise, Noah still fights with anxiety and trust problems caused by what happened to him in that kids' club. We have never gone on another cruise, and I've turned into someone who speaks loudly for tougher rules and oversight on children's programs that operate outside normal laws in international waters. The experience showed me that predators often hide inside jobs that give them easy access to vulnerable kids, and that big organizations with money on the line may work harder to protect their image than to protect the children in their care. The most chilling part of the whole ordeal was realizing how easily kids can be harmed inside places that appear safe, monitored, and family-friendly. Cruise ships are sealed-off worlds where normal safety checks don't work the same, and where parents have very few options when something goes wrong. Many families assume that the same protections their children have on land follow them onto the ocean. But the truth is very different. Maritime law and confusing legal boundaries create a setting where predators can act with almost no fear of punishment. I often wonder how many other parents experience strange or frightening things on Disney cruises or other cruise lines, and how many children were hurt in these programs that advertise themselves as safe and educational. The isolation of the ocean, mixed with the massive power these cruise companies hold and the strength of their legal teams, creates a perfect shield for hiding child endangerment and silencing any family that tries to speak the truth. My experience convinced me that parents should never assume any company, no matter how famous or trusted, will protect their children without parents watching closely. The long-term damage this left on my family has been heartbreaking. Not just because of what Noah suffered, but because we learned that institutions we once believed in might actually be protecting the very people who harm children. The cruise industry's growth and profits depend heavily on looking safe and family-friendly. But what happened to us showed how that clean, magical image can cover deep problems that place kids in danger, and how families who uncover these problems may be left helpless and unable to force real accountability. The psychological manipulation Noah endured in that kids' club was carefully crafted and disturbingly calculated, built to pick out vulnerable kids and shape them into easy targets. The fact that this happened inside a Disney-branded program meant to give parents peace of mind shows how predators can hide inside the most trusted institutions without being noticed. My experience taught me that parents must stay alert and trust their instincts, even if it means going up against powerful companies with entire teams dedicated to tearing down anyone who threatens their spotless reputation. Because at the end of the day, the safety of our children depends on our courage to speak out against these institutional failures, no matter how high the personal cost. Story 2. My name is Marcella, and I'm 29 years old. What happened to me during a solo wellness cruise to the Mediterranean in the fall of 2021 turned what should have been a healing retreat into the most psychologically devastating experience of my life. I had booked this particular cruise after going through a severe mental health crisis, following the sudden death of my younger sister in a car accident. My therapist had recommended that I take time away from work and familiar surroundings to process my grief in a supportive environment. The cruise was marketed as a therapeutic wellness experience with licensed counselors, meditation sessions, and healing workshops designed specifically for people dealing with trauma and loss. But what I discovered about the so-called therapeutic program has left me questioning the entire mental health industry and struggling with trust issues that continue to affect my recovery today. The ship was smaller than typical cruise vessels, accommodating only about 300 passengers, all of whom were supposedly dealing with various forms of emotional trauma or seeking wellness recovery. The atmosphere was deliberately calm and peaceful, with muted colors, soft music, and spaces designed for quiet reflection and group therapy sessions. The staff was led by a man named Sterling, who introduced himself as a licensed clinical psychologist, specializing in grief counseling and trauma recovery. He seemed knowledgeable and compassionate during the initial orientation, explaining their holistic approach to healing that combined traditional therapy with alternative wellness practices, meditation, and peer support groups. Everything felt professionally managed and genuinely focused on helping people heal from their emotional wounds. For the first 3 days, I participated enthusiastically in the various therapy sessions, group discussions, and wellness activities. Sterling and his team seemed genuinely interested in helping participants process their grief and trauma in healthy ways. The group sessions were emotionally intense, but felt safe and supportive, with other participants sharing their stories of loss, addiction recovery, relationship trauma, and other life challenges that had brought them to this healing cruise. I found myself opening up about my sister's death in ways that I hadn't been able to do with my therapist back home. The combination of being away from familiar triggers and being surrounded by people who understood deep emotional pain felt incredibly therapeutic and validating. However, by the 4th day, I began to notice subtle changes in the therapeutic approach that made me uncomfortable. The sessions became more invasive and personally intrusive, with Sterling asking detailed questions about my family background, financial situation, support systems at home, and personal relationships that seemed to go beyond normal grief counseling. He was particularly interested in my isolation since my sister's death. The fact that I had taken leave from work and that I had distanced myself from friends and family members who didn't understand my grief process when I questioned the relevance of some of these personal details to my healing process. He explained that comprehensive recovery required understanding all aspects of my life situation. The group dynamics also began to shift in ways that felt manipulative rather than therapeutic. Sterling started encouraging participants to view their outside relationships as potentially toxic or unsupportive of their healing journey. He suggested that family members and friends who hadn't experienced similar trauma couldn't understand what we were going through and might actually be hindering our recovery by expecting us to get over our losses or return to normal too quickly. These ideas resonated with my own feelings of isolation and misunderstanding, but something about the way he presented them felt designed to increase our dependence on the group rather than help us rebuild our external support systems. During our 5th day at sea, Sterling introduced what he called advanced healing techniques, more intensive therapy sessions that would help participants break through emotional barriers that traditional therapy couldn't reach. These sessions involved isolation exercises where participants were encouraged to cut off contact with the outside world completely, including family members and therapists back home. He explained that external influences during this critical healing phase could disrupt the deep psychological work we were doing, and that temporary isolation was necessary for authentic breakthrough experiences. Participants were asked to surrender their phones and communication devices during these advanced sessions to prevent outside interference with their healing process. I reluctantly agreed to participate in these isolation sessions because I was desperate for relief from the overwhelming grief that had consumed my life for months. But as the sessions progressed, they became increasingly disturbing and psychologically manipulative. Instead of helping me process my sister's death in healthy ways, Sterling began systematically breaking down my sense of reality and self-worth. Using techniques that felt more like brainwashing than legitimate therapy, he convinced me that my grief was evidence of deep psychological problems that required extensive treatment, and that my previous attempts at healing had failed because I wasn't committed enough to the recovery process. The most disturbing aspect of these sessions was the way Sterling used my vulnerability and desperate need for healing to gain psychological control over me. He claimed that my resistance to certain exercises or my questions about his methods were symptoms of my psychological dysfunction rather than legitimate concerns about his treatment approach, when I expressed discomfort with some of the more invasive therapeutic techniques. He suggested that my reluctance to trust the process was exactly the kind of self-sabotaging behavior that had prevented me from healing properly. The manipulation was subtle but systematic, designed to undermine my confidence in my own judgment and increase my dependence on his guidance. Over the next few days, Sterling introduced financial elements into the therapeutic program, explaining that true commitment to healing required more than just emotional investment. He talked about participants who had made significant financial contributions to support the ongoing development of their therapeutic community, and how these investments demonstrated the kind of serious dedication necessary for lasting recovery. He suggested that my recent inheritance from my sister's life insurance policy could be used to fund continued treatment and support the expansion of their wellness programs to help other trauma survivors. The way he framed these financial requests made them seem like natural extensions of my healing commitment rather than exploitation. The pressure to make financial commitments intensified as the cruise neared its end. Sterling claimed that participants who returned to their old environments without continued intensive support typically experienced relapses into depression and destructive behaviors. He offered extended treatment programs that would allow me to continue working with him and his team through residential facilities and ongoing therapeutic retreats, but these programs required significant upfront payments that would demonstrate my genuine commitment to recovery. He suggested that people who were truly serious about healing would find ways to prioritize their treatment investments over conventional financial concerns, like savings accounts or traditional living arrangements. When I began to question the financial aspects of the program and expressed concerns about the pressure to commit to expensive follow-up treatments, Sterling's therapeutic demeanor completely changed. He became confrontational and accusatory, claiming that my resistance to investment in my own healing was evidence of the self-destructive patterns that had led to my sister's death. He suggested that my reluctance to fully commit to the program meant I didn't really want to recover, and that I was choosing to remain stuck in my grief rather than do the difficult work of genuine healing. The psychological manipulation was devastating because it targeted my deepest fears about being responsible for my sister's accident and my genuine desire to heal from my trauma. The final days of the cruise were psychologically torturous as Sterling and his team continued to pressure me to commit to their extended programs while simultaneously undermining my confidence in my ability to heal without their continued intervention. They used information I had shared during vulnerable therapy sessions to manipulate my emotions and convince me that leaving their program would result in psychological deterioration and possibly even suicidal behavior. They claimed that participants who rejected their continued treatment often experienced complete breakdowns within months of returning home, and that my family would blame me if I didn't take advantage of this opportunity for comprehensive healing. I managed to resist signing any financial commitments during the cruise, but the psychological damage from the experience was severe and long-lasting. Sterling's manipulation had systematically undermined my trust in my own judgment and my ability to heal independently. He had taken my genuine grief and desperation for recovery and weaponized them to gain psychological control over me. When I returned home, I was more isolated and psychologically damaged than before the cruise, with additional trauma layered on top of my original grief that made it even more difficult to seek legitimate therapeutic help. My attempts to report Sterling's program to licensing authorities and consumer protection agencies were complicated by the fact that the cruise operated in international waters under maritime law, which made it difficult to establish which jurisdiction had authority to investigate psychological abuse and financial fraud. Committed aboard the ship, the cruise line claimed that they provided only transportation and accommodations and that they weren't responsible for the content or methods of third-party wellness programs that operated independently on their vessels. Sterling's organization had apparently structured their business to minimize legal liability while maximizing their ability to exploit vulnerable people seeking genuine therapeutic help. The investigation process was frustrating and ultimately unsuccessful, as authorities seemed more interested in protecting the cruise industry's reputation than pursuing accountability for predatory therapeutic programs. Sterling and his team had clearly developed expertise in exploiting legal and regulatory gaps that allowed them to operate their manipulative programs with minimal oversight or consequences. They understood exactly how to target people during their most vulnerable moments and use their desperation for healing to justify psychological manipulation and financial exploitation. Today, more than 3 years after that nightmare wellness cruise, I continue to struggle with the psychological damage caused by Sterling's program. The experience taught me that predators often hide behind legitimate-sounding credentials and therapeutic language to gain access to vulnerable people seeking help. They understand how to exploit genuine emotional pain and desperate needs for healing to justify increasingly invasive and manipulative interventions. My recovery from both my original grief and the additional trauma caused by Sterling's program has been complicated by trust issues that affect my ability to seek legitimate therapeutic support. The most disturbing aspect of this experience was realizing how easily people seeking genuine help for mental health issues can become victims of sophisticated psychological manipulation disguised as therapy. The isolation of being at sea, combined with the emotional vulnerability of trauma survivors, creates perfect conditions for predators who understand how to exploit human psychology for profit. The wellness and alternative therapy industries seem to provide numerous opportunities for unscrupulous individuals to victimize people who are already suffering and desperate for relief from their emotional pain. I often wonder how many other participants from that cruise were successfully manipulated into Sterling's extended programs, and how many people seeking legitimate help for trauma and grief have been victimized by similar operations that exploit the growing market for alternative wellness and therapeutic retreats. The combination of emotional vulnerability, social isolation, and limited regulatory oversight creates environments where psychological predators can operate with relative impunity while devastating the lives of people who are already struggling with significant mental health challenges. My experience convinced me that the mental health and wellness industries need much stronger oversight and regulation to protect vulnerable consumers from predatory programs that exploit genuine therapeutic needs for financial gain. People seeking help for trauma and grief are often desperate enough to ignore warning signs that might be obvious under normal circumstances, making them particularly susceptible to manipulation by individuals who understand how to weaponize legitimate therapeutic concepts for exploitative purposes. The lasting damage from these experiences can be more devastating than the original trauma that brought people to seek help in the first place. Story 03. My name is Landon, and I'm 53 years old. What I discovered during what should have been a peaceful retirement cruise in the Baltic Sea during the summer of 2023 exposed a medical conspiracy that continues to haunt me today. I had recently retired from my career as a pharmaceutical research scientist after 30 years working for various drug companies, and I thought a month-long cruise through Scandinavia and Russia would be the perfect way to celebrate my retirement and recover from decades of high-stress laboratory work. The cruise was marketed as a wellness voyage for mature travelers with onboard medical facilities and health monitoring programs designed to help seniors maintain their health while enjoying their golden years. But what I uncovered about the ship's medical operations has left me questioning the entire maritime healthcare system and fearing for the safety of vulnerable passengers. The ship was a mid-sized vessel accommodating about 800 passengers, most of them retirees and older adults seeking a sophisticated travel experience with comprehensive medical support. The medical facility appeared state-of-the-art with modern equipment, a pharmacy, and a staff of doctors and nurses who claimed extensive experience in geriatric medicine and maritime healthcare. The chief medical officer was a man named Augustus, who introduced himself as a specialist in aging-related health issues. He seemed knowledgeable and professional during the initial health screenings that all passengers over 60 were required to complete. The wellness program included regular health monitoring, medication management, and preventive care services that seemed designed to ensure passenger safety throughout the long voyage. For the first week, I participated in the routine health monitoring sessions, providing blood samples for various tests, and allowing the medical staff to track my vital signs and general health indicators. Augustus explained that this comprehensive monitoring was necessary because extended sea voyages could affect seniors in unpredictable ways, and that early detection of health problems was crucial for passenger safety. The other passengers seemed impressed with the level of medical attention, many commenting that they received better health care on the cruise than they did at home. Everything seemed professionally managed and genuinely focused on maintaining passenger health throughout our month at sea. However, during my second week aboard the ship, I began to notice irregularities in the medical program that troubled me as someone with extensive pharmaceutical research experience. The blood tests being performed were far more comprehensive than necessary for routine health monitoring, including specialized analyses that seemed designed to gather detailed information about passengers' genetic markers, hormone levels, and metabolic functions. When I asked Augustus about the specific tests being performed, he provided vague explanations about comprehensive health screening, but his answers didn't align with standard geriatric care protocols that I knew from my research background. My suspicions intensified when I observed the medical staff collecting tissue samples during routine procedures that should not have required such samples. Passengers undergoing minor treatments for common ailments were having small tissue biopsies taken, supposedly for infection screening. But the preservation and labeling procedures I witnessed suggested these samples were being prepared for much more extensive analysis. Most passengers were elderly and trusting, accepting the medical staff's explanations without question. But my scientific background made me realize that the scope of biological material being collected went far beyond anything necessary for passenger health care. During our third week at sea, I discovered that passengers were being administered medications and supplements that weren't properly disclosed or explained. The daily vitamins and health supplements provided by the medical staff contained compounds that weren't listed on the labels. When I used my portable analytical equipment to test these substances, I found experimental drugs that were still in clinical trial phases, including several compounds designed to affect cognitive function and immune system responses. The realization that passengers were unknowingly participating in unauthorized medical experimentation was absolutely horrifying, especially considering that most of the test subjects were vulnerable elderly people who had trusted the cruise line to provide legitimate health care. The most disturbing discovery came when I gained access to restricted areas of the medical facility during a medical emergency that required all available staff. Hidden behind the main treatment areas, I found a sophisticated laboratory equipped for advanced pharmaceutical research, including equipment for synthesizing experimental compounds, analyzing genetic material, and monitoring the physiological effects of various drug treatments. Detailed patient files showed that passengers were being systematically categorized based on their genetic profiles, medical histories, and responses to various experimental treatments. The entire cruise operation appeared to be a floating clinical trial using unknowing elderly passengers as test subjects. The research being conducted was clearly coordinated with onshore pharmaceutical companies and research institutions. I discovered shipping manifests showing biological samples and data being regularly transferred to laboratories in various countries at each port of call. The passenger health monitoring was generating valuable research data about aging, genetics, and pharmaceutical responses that was being sold to drug companies for product development. But none of the passengers had consented to participate in medical research, and most were completely unaware that their biological information was being harvested and commercialized. When I confronted Augustus about what I had discovered, his response revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. He admitted that cruise lines had been partnering with pharmaceutical companies for years to conduct research on aging populations, using the isolated environment of cruise ships to monitor subjects over extended periods without outside medical oversight. He claimed that the research was beneficial and would lead to better treatments for age-related diseases, but he couldn't explain why passengers weren't informed about their participation or asked to provide consent. The violation of medical ethics and patient rights was systematic and extensive. Augustus made it clear that my pharmaceutical industry background made me a threat to their research operation. He warned me that speaking out about what I had discovered would result in serious consequences, including potential legal action for interfering with legitimate medical research. He claimed that the cruise line and their pharmaceutical partners had extensive resources to protect their interests, and that passengers who caused problems often experienced medical emergencies that required early disembarkation. The threat was unmistakable. If I attempted to expose their unauthorized experimentation, my own health and safety would be at risk. Over the final week of the cruise, I documented as much evidence as possible while trying to avoid detection by the medical staff. I collected samples of the experimental medications, photographed research equipment and patient files, and recorded conversations that revealed the scope of the unauthorized research program. But gathering this evidence was extremely dangerous, as Augustus and his team were clearly monitoring passengers who showed too much interest in their operations. Several passengers who had asked questions about their treatments experienced sudden health problems that required intensive medical attention, creating a climate of fear that discouraged others from questioning the medical program. The most horrifying aspect of this conspiracy was realizing how vulnerable elderly passengers were to this type of exploitation. Cruise lines market their medical programs as safety features that allow seniors to travel with confidence. But in reality, these programs can provide cover for unauthorized medical experimentation on populations that are particularly susceptible to manipulation. The isolated environment of cruise ships makes it impossible for passengers to seek outside medical opinions or assistance, creating perfect conditions for unethical research practices. When the cruise finally ended and I was able to return home, I immediately contacted medical ethics boards, pharmaceutical industry regulators, and law enforcement agencies to report what I had discovered. But the response was frustratingly slow and bureaucratic. Investigating crimes committed in international waters requires coordination between multiple agencies and jurisdictions, and the powerful interests involved in pharmaceutical research have extensive resources to challenge accusations and protect their operations. Many of the regulatory agencies seemed more concerned with protecting industry relationships than pursuing accountability for unethical research practices. The investigation process revealed that similar unauthorized research programs were operating across multiple cruise lines, particularly those targeting elderly and chronically ill passengers who were viewed as valuable research subjects. The cruise industry's lack of oversight and regulation created perfect conditions for pharmaceutical companies to conduct research that would be impossible to perform in traditional clinical settings, where informed consent and ethical oversight are required. The conspiracy involved cruise lines, pharmaceutical companies, research institutions, and regulatory agencies that had financial incentives to allow these programs to continue. My attempts to publicize what I had discovered were met with legal threats and industry pressure designed to discredit my claims and silence my testimony. The pharmaceutical companies involved hired powerful legal teams to tear apart my evidence and twist my words, trying to make me look unstable. They argued that everything I saw was simply a misunderstanding of normal medical work, and they insisted that my background in the pharmaceutical world made me overly suspicious, causing me to imagine danger where there was none. But the cold way they reacted, the synchronized statements, and the way every company defended the others made it clear they weren't trying to explain anything. They were trying to bury the truth and protect a research system that depended on silence, confusion, and fear rather than honesty and consent. Today, more than a year after that nightmare cruise experience, I continue to struggle with the knowledge that thousands of elderly passengers are unknowingly participating in unauthorized medical experiments every year. The cruise industry keeps growing, and more companies are offering health and wellness voyages that look comforting on the outside but give pharmaceutical groups more chances to slip their research into places where no one is watching. Passengers board believing they will get helpful medical care, not become test subjects. But the truth I uncovered still hangs over me, reminding me that these programs can twist trust into a weapon and turn people into data points without their knowledge. The lasting impact of discovering this conspiracy has changed everything about my retirement, filling quiet days with fear and making even simple travel feel unsafe. I can't relax or enjoy anything anymore without wondering what hidden purpose is hiding underneath a friendly service or a smiling face. The idea that the industry I worked in for decades could hide such cold and careful deception has shattered my trust in ways I never expected, affecting my life far beyond the cruise itself. I've dedicated my retirement to advocating for stronger oversight of maritime medical practices and pharmaceutical research, but the forces behind these programs are huge, and every step toward real change feels like pushing against a wall built to protect the people in power, not the passengers who trust them. The most disturbing aspect of this experience was realizing how easy it is for vulnerable people to be used by industries that appear caring on the surface. Pharmaceutical companies understand that elderly travelers on long cruises make perfect research subjects because they're far from outside doctors. They rely on authority figures, and their changing health gives researchers exactly the kind of data they want. The mix of massive industry wealth, weak regulations, and public trust creates a shadowy space where unethical research can hide for years without being discovered or stopped. My experience convinced me that passengers, particularly elderly travelers, need to be extremely cautious about cruise lines that promote extensive medical programs and health monitoring services. These services might be real healthcare, but they can also hide research that steals people's rights without their knowledge. On a cruise ship, where you're cut off from the outside world, there's no way to check if a treatment is real or ask a different doctor for help. That isolation creates the perfect environment for hidden experiments targeting people who trust that maritime medicine follows the same rules and ethics as land-based care. If you've enjoyed these terrifying true cruise ship horror stories, please like this video and subscribe to Mr. Nightfale for more bone-chilling tales from the deep. Your support helps me bring you the darkest stories from the world's most dangerous waters. Until next time, stay safe and remember that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones wearing uniforms and promising to keep you safe.